Variant on YouTube says being lectured about nihilism by a death cult called the Republican Party. What an experience. Chlorokin on Twitch says some credible threats here. Who is the mole? 3. Uh, on Twitch says even MAGA is a relatively extreme group, but we know they won't be labeled that way, which is the problem. Yeah. Moody on YouTube says, speaking of two tier, they call Starmer two tier Kier, which is pretty funny. That is pretty funny. I do like when they call him that. Silver Fang on YouTube says, yeah, this just ways for the FBI to protect the white nationalist terrorists by classifying them as something else. Yeah, I think it's part of that. I also think it's a way for them to classify anybody who engages in any kind of like anti-government action as a terrorist, and especially as people become more and more vocal about their belief that the government does not exist to serve them, which is which could be described as nihilistic, right? The pessimism around like the U.S. government's ability to deliver justice is like a form of nihilism, even though it's rooted in like reality. Okay. While the crimes alleged would certainly justify throwing these guys in a dungeon forever, the idea that they threaten to usher in societal collapse is laughable. Casimir is accused by the FBI of having worked with transnational sextortion network called 764 to target children for sexual abuse. The details alleged are stomach turning. Blah blah blah. We'll just skip all those parts because they're not really relevant to the particular thrust of the issue. But the complaint says these acts were intended to further the network's goal of accelerating social unrest and the downfall of current world order, including the United States government, which sounds to me like some demented philosophical justification for being a pedo. In fact, the 62-page complaint doesn't seem to provide any evidence of Casimiro's belief in this goal specifically. Instead, it's repeating that this was 764's purpose. Uh, as for Kassab, the warrant does at least describe a 3-page manifesto being found on his phone espousing a desire to kill President Trump to precipitate societal collapse. But planning is barely described in manifesto or elsewhere, save for some discussion about his allegedly having paid for a drone and explosives for it to drop. The warrant also alleges Kassab was in touch with the Order of Nine Angles, a satanic neo-Nazi group that espouses accelerationism, a fancy word for the belief that destabilizing the social order allows for radical change. That is pretty heady stuff to describe a 17-year-old and ends up having the feel of an episode of Altered Carbon. But a lot of people believe like crazy shit like this, right? That's the part that's important. Like a lot of people not just believe like apocalyptically crazy shit like this, but a lot of people ascribe, a lot of people espouse views that could be considered accelerationist if you don't really know what that word mean and you're just looking to stretch the definition of the word. A lot of people espouse like a desire to like see the American government be upended. So for me, I just look at it like as part of like making all of that illegal. Like make all of like the even vaguest forms of anti-governmental like dissatisfaction subject to increased scrutiny. Uh, President Trump, his Attorney General Pam Bondi, and FBI Director Kash Patel have been on threat mongering has been on a threat mongering spree, applying the terrorism label to various Tesla vandalism cases in recent months. The Trump administration, led by counterterrorism czar Sebastian Gorka, I forgot that that's what he's doing now in the Trump administration. Um, I haven't really seen Gorka in a while. Uh, is also preparing a new sweeping counterterrorism strategy premised on the belief that violent opposition to Trump is being orchestrated by shadowy forces, as I reported last week. Yeah, there it is. Like it's all part of some sort of nebulous terrorist organization that hates Trump and hates America. Earlier this month, Elon even went so far as suggesting these manuals are mere foot soldiers being directed by unseen generals that need to be rooted out. Here's how Musk put it. What we actually have to get to is the people who are organizing and paying for these attacks in protest. The people who are actually throwing the Molotov cocktails, they are the foot soldiers. We need to go after the generals. So yeah, like we need to go after the people who are fomenting dissatisfaction with the American project, right? We're not going to do any sort of like self-reflection about why there is mass dissatisfaction with political figures, um, the oligarch class, with society and institutions at large. We're just going to make it illegal to have that kind of dissatisfaction. Uh, Even assuming that any of these crimes are some kind of serious threat to the government or to the established social order, the Justice Department already has a violent extremist category for them: anti government or anti authority violent extremism, or agave. For sure. They should do more like they should do more stuff like that. Like the acronyms should like spell stuff out, even if it's a bit of a stretch. Like the Kids Next Door episodes. Like it should be like I don't want to say a full backronym, but they should put in a little bit more effort to make it spell out like a word, because that's just like cool. It's cooler. Um, this was the designation that the Biden administration invented to apply to pro-Trump or seemingly pro-Trump violence, including January 6th rioters, as my editor has reported. Yeah, I get that. I also feel like this is still like different though. Like anti-government or anti-authority violent extremism is still slightly different from like just extremism that results organically as a result of the fact that people just don't feel like the government exists to do anything other than to disenfranchise and disillusion them. Like that is just a feeling that is becoming more pervasive, and it's slightly different from like anti-government and anti-authority violent extremism. Although I do see like the trajectory to become more and more vague. To get to this point, right? This is all part of the same like trajectory to make it from like specifically white nationalists are a problem, which they are, into like broadly speaking, there's an anti-governmental and anti-authoritarian, rather, wow, anti-authority violent strain amongst like extremists in America, to the point where it's like any belief that the government is doing anything other than serving the public good is enough to get you on the radar for like some type of anti-government extremist viewpoint investigation. But now that it's a Republican in the White House, rabbit season has turned to duck season, so the terrorists du jour are now Trump's opponents, and most conveniently for the national security state, anyone who threatens the government itself. Yeah, I think that's the right read. I know I had a lot of like comments, but I think ultimately it's important to highlight this kind of thing, because like the government is telling you it's getting ready for a wave of mass unrest that's not rooted in any particular political ideology, but in the widespread dissatisfaction with the way things are. As a result of the way the government has been captured by a certain class of like the incredibly wealthy population. Uh, So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed that piece. Definitely go over and give Kin Clip a subscription, friend of the show. Howard Nutlick on Twitch says it should include the Confederate flag as a signifier, and we will see how fast they get rid of it. The Confederate flag sucks. It's another like shitty flag. Like we can talk about flags. I know I'm a bit of a flag connoisseur, if you will. The American flag is one of like the worst flags by design, um, aesthetically in the entire world. It's very busy. The colors are not particularly very like I mean, well they are complementary, but they don't look very good together in my opinion. In that like layout with the corner being like all these fucking stars. I think every subversion of the American flag, like the sovereign citizen flag, looks better than the American flag. The black American flag also looks better than the American flag. Like the straight up just American flag, like the bog standard American flag sucks. I couldn't imagine dying for that. No offense. Like no, I mean like I mean, I can't imagine dying for any flag, but if I were going to die for a flag, I would hope that the flag would be nice at least. Like, imagine if you had to choose between like dying over an ugly pair of Jordans or dying over like a nice pair of Jordans. you would at least want like when they talk about it in the news to be like, oh yeah, but like those kicks were fresh. Like not like oh like it wasn't worth. They're gonna say it wasn't worth your life no matter what, but at least you want people to be like that shit was fresh. Like like that was like you could see why people wanted that though. Like you could see why people thought that was like I, you may not be on the same wavelength as me there, but you can appreciate I think the resonance slightly. Hmm. Uh, Mm. I don't want to get into like flags though. The Nepal one does go hard. Yeah, I like ones that aren't like the Nepal one is the one that's like just two triangles. It's like one of the only ones that's not just like a rectangle. So I think you get bonus points for that. Like I don't necessarily have a favorite flag, and even if I do, I don't want this to become like, oh, Brandon says like his favorite flag is from this country and it's like problematic. But if I had to like have a favorite flag, let me think about that. Like what is my favorite flag design? The Sri Lankan flag is cool. Like that's the one that has like the dragon on it with it's like it's gold and orange and green and I think maybe like a burgundy. I can't remember specifically. I know when I see it. Um, hmm. I do like minimalist flags though. Bhutan has a good flag. That's the one that I think Bhutan is also a dragon, like an Asian style dragon, but it's a rectangle and it's split into two triangles, right? One like one orange and one yellow. What's a good flag? I can't. And I'm not trying. I think the Malaysian flag I like, even though it's very similar to the United States of America, just because it replaces the stars with like a nice crescent moon and like star. Like I think that one's nice. Um, man, what's a good flag? What makes a good flag really is a good question. People keep saying like flag. People keep like naming flags with dragons. I'm not like a dragon guy. I mean, I did watch a lot of Dragon Tales on PBS as a kid because that show kind of kicked ass. But like, I'm not like overly affectionate for dragons. I feel like I give people a lot of wrong impressions because I have like seemingly very strong, nuanced opinions on things that I oftentimes don't even care about. Like, I feel like people think I really care about werewolves or like I really like werewolves or like I'm into like werewolves in one way. I just have a lot of strong opinions about werewolves, and especially as they relate to like the percentage of wolf to person they could be, or should be, I should say. But I don't really think about them besides that a lot. Mm. I like Canada's flag. Canada's flag is cool. I like that it has a maple leaf on it. I'm a big nature guy. Damn, let's look. This is a total aside and not exactly why I did this today, but now I want to look up like some flags of the world. Yeah, yeah, some flags of the world and see like which ones what one I think is like cool. Real quick. Like I just real quick, just real quick. We're just gonna do this real quick. You can't see what I'm looking at, but I'm trying to see if I can see something that like immediately like reminds me of what I like. Mm. I will admit I like a lot of the African flags. People are gonna say is that's identity politics, but I like a lot of the African flags because they are not afraid to like have like nice colors in there, and also like crests and shit. I got good crest on a flag. You know what? We're getting off topic again. I did just to like lighten things up. I know this article contained a lot of like CSAM mention, and it's the morning or the afternoon or the evening, depending where you are. But you might be just looking for something a little bit more mellow, a little bit less like intense. I don't know if you saw this clip that was going around on X a few days ago. Um, but this is about this clip. I'll just read the tweet here, or at least I'll summarize the tweet here. This is a clip from I don't know what WMUR, what station that is. It sounds like a local news station, but this is a local news story about a guy who was detained by ICE, who was a Trump voter, like an American citizen, was detained by ICE coming back from like a Palm Sunday, I think, event in Canada, and well, you know what? That's basically it. Like we'll let him explain the rest in his own words. Uh, Moody on YouTube says, ironically, the Greenland flag is really good. Yeah, that's one thing they have to consider if they become like part of America, which they shouldn't. Is that they have to take the really shitty American flag. Yeah, we can do another segment of like the leopards eating your face voters finding out that their face are getting eaten by leopards.
He just reached for his gun. He's like, step out of the vehicle right now. I said, okay, I'm stepping out.
Bashir Attallah recounts the moments he says U.S. Customs and Border agents detained him and his wife for several hours Sunday night.
For no reason. And even if there was any reason that I don't know about, they didn't even share that reason with me.
I mean, I can think of a reason why this man was like detained by ICE. Can he really not think of a reason?
Attallah is a U.S. citizen. The couple was coming home after visiting family for Palm Sunday.
I was detained. I was not free to leave. Holding signs, no shoes, no jacket. It was freezing cold.
The real estate attorney says the officers wouldn't let him call his sister, an immigration attorney. She tells us she didn't get a call until 3 hours later.
What happened to my brother is not reasonable. It's an abuse of power.
Celine says CBP accessed Bashir's email, which contained client information, under duress. Bashir says he declined going to the hospital after experiencing chest pain because he didn't want to start the whole process over again. We asked New Hampshire-based immigration attorney Ron Abramson about this case, which he isn't affiliated with.
Detaining people with no basis is not something America does. This sort of incident raises the question of how far will this go, and is anyone safe?
Selena Tala asking another question.
What message are we sending to people who are legally in this country?
I really felt like a criminal.
Customs and Border Protection officials got back to us at about 3:45 this afternoon. They say, quote, the traveler's accusations are blatantly false and sensationalized. CBP officers acted in accordance with established protocols. Upon arrival at the port of entry, the traveler was appropriately referred to secondary inspection, a routine lawful process that occurs daily and can apply for any traveler.
Yeah, so I mean, as if we needed more evidence that being a Trump supporter, that being, that being racist won't protect you from racism. We're just going to get stories like this every day, multiple times a day, multiple times a week until Trump is no longer president, of people who voted for him suddenly coming to the realization that they are vulnerable to his policies for one reason or another, right? Because they're brown, because they're not wealthy, because they live in the wrong place. Like, there are just so many ways in which you can fall into the type of identity bucket that prevents you from being protected by like the American establishment. That it's I guess it seems amazing that like people can not like he can go like I didn't do anything wrong and be like, are you serious? Like you think that like it was because you did something wrong as opposed to you having the wrong identity, having like the wrong sounding name. But I mean, we have to understand that like Americans have had this, and people who live in America, because he's obviously, he's been living here for 10 years and is like a citizen, but is not, originally from America. Not that that makes a difference to me, but a lot of Americans, regardless of whether natural born or naturalized later or immigrants, suffer from the same delusion that they're special, that there's something inherently and easily identifiably special about them, that like if a racist or misogynist or some other bigot who normally hates people like them sees them, that they will just automatically understand that they're one of the good ones. And then you have a further level of people who actually just don't believe that like the Trump administration or ICE is racist. They've had their brains fried that much that they simply think that like whenever they're accused of that by the ACLU or any number of non-governmental organizations who say that they practice like biased law enforcement, or like, any number of people who have had this experience, they just think they're all exaggerating. That's such a big part of like the right wing's appeal and ability to appeal to people in this society, is to make them think that either you're too special and we're not talking about you, or whenever someone is saying that we are doing something that you would find normally very troubling, they're just exaggerating. They're just being hysterical. You know how the far left is. They're always like making things up until it's too late for you to realize that people weren't making it up. Because now we have, I don't know if you've seen, but we see all over Twitter every day, right wing, or at least, center right Trump curious style pundits doing their mea culpas. Like, turns out maybe I was wrong about this, and like leftists were right that Trump was going to violate the Constitution because he had already done it before. Like, like we're seeing those kinds of mea culpas, but that's like an artificial. That's like a strategic form of like learning, where it's like we go through this period of forgetting and then relearning and then forgetting and then relearning. That enforced amnesia is a big part of the American political system and keeping it the way it is. Because, what else you going to do, right? What else? What else is there? I mean, there's tons of stuff. I just don't, I mean, I just want to have fun. We had so much fun talking about TV shows. And now I'm just like, now we got to do the news, blah, 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 blah. No, that's not true. That's not nice. The news is important. I guess, you know what? Let's find out more about the Chinese tariffs. I guess I'm going to break my rule, or at least not break my rule, but continue to at least give it like 48 hours in between like tariff news coverage, just to allow things to like happen and then settle and then see what actually sticks around. No, I have no idea. I have no doubt that the stock market, the Dow Jones, the S&P 500 is probably not doing well today, given like, I guess, the 245% tariffs. But I also know that China is apparently refusing to not negotiate, but meet for trade talks with the United States of America despite these. So let's hear some about that. Let's hear some more about that, and then we'll continue to find out more about these increased tariffs.
China is refusing to negotiate with President Trump on U.S. tariffs. In fact, the nation is taking the trade war to a new height. China is refusing to accept deliveries of Boeing jets. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer reports the move would not just be to blow to America's largest exporter, but also to the U.S. economy.
This morning, the world's two largest economies locked in an escalating trade war, with China now hitting back, responding to President Trump's tariffs by targeting U.S. companies, telling Chinese airlines not to order jets from Boeing, America's biggest exporter, according to Bloomberg. President Trump accusing them of reneging on the big Boeing deal of fully committed to aircraft. Overnight, tech giant NVIDIA projecting that U.S. tariffs will cost it a possible $5.5 billion. China's also putting export controls on critical rare earths, limiting Hollywood films in the lucrative Chinese market, adding U.S. companies to its unreliable entities list, and threatening to cut off fentanyl talks. Yesterday, the White House press secretary reading a statement she said President Trump dictated.
China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger.
But neither side seems ready for that deal yet.
What kind of statement
China's
is that?
leader Xi Jinping is
There are like tons of difference between. I guess they mean in terms of like negotiating, because we've talked about Trump's final technique, the art of the deal. So like there's no need to go back into that. But obviously there are tons of differences between China and other countries. Like, what are you talking about? Come on.
Tour, urging Vietnam to stand up to America's
Hell
unilateral bullying. And after Vice President J.D. Vance referred to Chinese peasants last week, now a diplomat here saying, quote, those peasants from the U.S. will soon be crying.
He's not wrong about that.
Feeding economic nationalism and a flood of AI-generated memes in China, showing Trump administration officials working factory production lines. But beyond the rhetoric...
Damn, China has our number. That's the other thing that makes this like an unfair battle between like two populations. It's like I feel like the average educated, like, and by educated I mean, just like averagely educated, not like expert, but the average educated Chinese person, probably the average Chinese person, has a way more clear-eyed understanding of America than even some of the best educated Americans have about China. And that makes, these narratives about, oh, China is going to lose, China's going to suffer, China needs us more than we need them. That's what, sells that here, right? Because Americans don't know anything about China, but Chinese people know a lot about Americans. A lot, maybe more about America and Americans than a lot of Americans do, considering how much propaganda Americans shovel into their own minds. So like that automatically makes it a kind of like a very difficult uphill battle for like the American consumer to deal with, because they just won't know what's happening. They just won't they won't understand what's happening, which will just like increase the amount of like ignorant anger that they feel.
Real impact. Consumers feeling it in everything from toys to socks to toothbrushes. 97% of baby strollers and 87% of car seats sold in the U.S. are made.
Also, yeah, JD Vance saying that JD Vance is a liability. JD Vance has been a liability to the Trump campaign and administration since day one. JD Vance was such a liability that the moment they announced that JD Vance was the vice president, people stopped caring that Trump almost got like fully domed in front live on camera by like a sniper like in a field, like just legit. They were like, oh, like that did happen, but look at JD Vance, he sucks. And all of these attempts of JD Vance to ingratiate himself with like the online Groyper community by having these like epic racist owns of other countries are just making those other countries less likely to deal with us. You can have like, you know, your angry trade war, like businessman stuff, or you can have your like angry online racist, you know, commentary about like Islamist UK, but it's going to be hard for you to have both of those at the same time.
Made in China, effectively the only source of baby goods for parents.
Jesus.
This vendor in Yiwu telling us U.S. clients just aren't buying anymore because of tariffs.
And that was Janice Mackey-Freyer reporting. California is fighting back against President Donald Trump's tariff authority. California Governor Gavin Newsom is set to file a lawsuit in federal court suing Trump over his use of emergency powers to enact sweeping global tariffs. The lawsuit argues Trump lacks the authority to enact such sweeping tariffs, saying such action requires congressional approval.
Spending on motor vehicles and parts was up a whopping 5.3% in March from February. That was the strongest monthly pace since January of 2023. Supplies of new and used vehicles for sale are declining rapidly as consumers flock to stores ahead of potential price increases due to the tariffs. The day's supply of new vehicles, which is calculated by an estimated daily retail sales rate, dropped from 91 days at the beginning of March to 70 days this month, and the day's supply of pre-owned vehicles declined by 4 days down to 39 days now. Some are concerned that these sales numbers will stall once automakers and dealers exhaust their tariff-free inventories.
It's factories like this one in Yiwu, China, that makes hair accessories, a lot of them for export to the U.S., that are beginning to feel the sting of...
Also, I've said this before, but it was about Canada in relation to the USA. I think U.S. consumers are probably also uniquely ignorant about like supply chains and where their products come from. Like the average U.S. consumer probably doesn't know where like the everyday things that they use are made. And that also puts them at a disadvantage because Chinese people for sure have a better grip about stuff like that, just generally speaking. But Americans are like, you know, again, this is part of the alienation. This is about the encultured ignorance of the American population, which makes them easier to exploit by our government. It also makes them vulnerable, not just to exploitation by our government, but exploitation by like other nefarious groups, but also to just, you know, these kinds of unhappy surprises where they go like, oh, we can survive a trade war. We can survive a trade war. And then they go to like Walmart looking for like their favorite snack or looking for, you know, their kids, you know, preferred nutritional, I don't know what you call it, like baby formula, right? And it just doesn't exist anymore there. And they're like, well, what happened? And it's like, you don't know?
Soaring tariffs, now at least 145% on all Chinese goods. China is still refusing to negotiate with President Trump, and now the retaliation goes beyond tariffs. Beijing telling Chinese airlines to not order jets from Boeing. It's America's biggest exporter, this according to Bloomberg. China's also putting export controls on critical rare earths. It's limiting Hollywood films in the Chinese market, adding U.S. companies to its unreliable entities list, and threatening to...
I was basically repeating again. I will say, the fact that it took all of this to make China try to steer away from Boeing, I mean, it does show some weaknesses of leadership because, I mean, come on, man. Boeing? Sit Babe on YouTube says, that's the crazy thing. The tariffs haven't even hit yet, right? Who can say? I think some of them have, like some of them. I mean, maybe the real tariffs were the friends we made along the way. That's all I can say. All I can say is that I don't think any of them are long for the world. Certainly not the 245% ones. Is that still like hold on, this clip is not bringing that up, but that's what I'm hearing, 245% tariffs. But let's see. Let's see. 245% Chinese tariffs. Let's see where we're going. Can it go higher? Probably. Okay, here's like a CBC clip about it.
Goods last year. The number is so outrageous, it's very hard to believe, because numbers this high just start to lose all meaning.
245% tariffs on Chinese imports.
Because escalating US tariffs from 10% to 20, then to 54, then to 104, then to 145, and now presumably to 245. That's, for all intents and purposes, only a few steps away from declaring infinity tariffs, to which the only rational reply is to say, oh yeah? Well then we're tariffing you infinity plus one. But even a mind-boggling 245% tariff on Chinese goods, if true, it would mean more than tripling the cost on everything that comes into the United States from China, which, for businesses who might spend months or years building reliable supply chains, would represent a seismic overnight shift. So you can understand the fear factor here. And considering the US bought close to $500 billion worth of Chinese goods last year, well, that's a major line item that just got a whole lot bigger, right? But it's not entirely true. Don't get me wrong, 245% is a real tariff applied by the US on China. Just not in the way people thought.
Is it a real tariff though? Are any of these tariffs real? Like, define real.
We can trace the confusion back to a White House fact sheet published on April 15th that was actually primarily about critical minerals and firming up the US supply chain. But buried down near the bottom, a nod to Liberation Day tariffs that spurred more than 75 countries to reach out to discuss new trade deals. It goes on, except for China, which retaliated.
I will say we still haven't seen any of those trade deals manifest. We've heard a lot about Japan and Cambodia and places, but they still haven't manifested. I don't know what could possibly be taking all of these trade deals so long. We've been hearing about 75 countries, 90 plus countries. They're all at the table. They're all signing. They're all like 0% tariffs. America can export its chlorinated chicken wherever it wants. It can poison whatever children it wants. Or globally now. Like, I haven't really seen that yet, and I don't know.
Before noting, for the first time I've ever seen, that China now faces up to a 245% tariff on imports to the United States as a result of its retaliatory actions. A tariff this high would make trade with China very difficult.
It would be more than enough over time to pretty much bring trade to a halt.
But as debilitating a move a 245% tariff on Chinese goods would be, it fits into a pattern, right?
Punishing tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico.
China retaliated immediately, a 15% tax on U.S. coal, 10% on U.S. crude oil.
A 34% tax on imports from China.
34% that takes effect on all U.S. goods.
Additional 50% retaliatory tariff on China.
Retaliatory tariffs of 84%.
Tariffs on China to 145%.
Tariffs on American goods to 125%.
In this protracted back and forth, China would have the final word, hitting back with that 125% tariff, but also issuing a statement. Even if the U.S. continues to impose even higher tariffs, it would no longer have any economic significance and would go down as a joke in the history of world economics.
It's definitely funny, you know, but I don't know how many people will be laughing once they actually discover how much they have to pay for things.
If the U.S. continues to play a numbers game with tariffs, China will not respond, which was understandable because never mind 245, even at 145 or 125 or even 50% tariffs. The vast majority of companies out there aren't making any profit.
Well, there is no profit margin. It's just impossible because your price becomes so much higher than the prices of your competitors or the price that a consumer is willing to pay. Tariffs under 50% will tend to squeeze profit margins. Tariffs above 50% will tend to end all trade.
But despite the vague and provocative use of 245% in the White House fact sheet, there are some very important words that are easy to miss. China now faces up to a 245% tariff.
The first Trump administration was defined in some ways by the trade war with China.
This is adding to tariffs that were there during the first administration, that were largely kept by the Biden administration and have been notched up a couple times under the current Trump administration.
So these aren't the first tariffs China's facing?
Yes, the 245% referenced in the White House fact sheet. That's not a new tariff. It's simply the highest tariff within an enormous range of tariffs that have been high for a long time. For example, toys, they're tariffed at 145%. Children's books, they're actually tariffed at 0%. And smartphones, among a very lucrative...
I mean, do I need to explain to you why they don't bother to tariff, like, books coming into America? Like, come on. Not really a high yield market for not being rude.
Class of items recently granted an exemption. They're tariffed at 20% right now. But at the extreme end of the spectrum, there are two classes of goods facing a 245% tariff, which is because of a mix of old and new tariffs.
Okay.
Syringes.
Okay.
And electric vehicles.
Okay.
The U.S. basically wanted to close off its market to Chinese electric vehicles to allow more space for a domestic electric vehicle industry to take hold. Syringes are a little different. It turned out that in the pandemic, a shortage of syringes kept the U.S. from vaccinating as fast as it otherwise could.
So did Trump just levy a 245% tariff on China? No. And in fact, it's the Biden administration that increased certain tariffs on China that Trump has since added to. The point is, 145% is the right number when you count new broad-based tariffs on China applied during Trump's second term. Anything higher than that takes a longer trade history into account and is very much product-specific. But does it even matter?
No, not really.
Tariffs anywhere near this high all have the same effect, and that is to all but erase the benefits of trade, period. Trump's position is that China needs to make this right.
Hundreds of billions of dollars a year they'd make on us on trade. I have great respect for China, but they can't do this.
The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them.
And though anything is possible with Trump, this doesn't appear to be a fight he wants to be seen losing.
Like how it ends with like a reel of the guy's like Tinder shots. He's good looking. It's fine. Yeah, no, like that's all this is really about now. Ego. This whole thing was driven by ego from the beginning. Like the broad tariffs were driven by Trump's ego to like have. I always say it, like he just wanted a bunch of people kissing his ass for like indefinitely, really. But that was what it was about. It was a miscalculation that you could cause like a trade war with every single country in the entire planet, and not have that obviously disadvantage you, because then where are you going to get anything? We're going to get anything from, and create new coalitions amongst like otherwise countries that otherwise weren't having as much trade as they were having with you, because they need to have new markets for stuff. Like Trump, I saw someone say it, and it's just true, and it's obvious, but I will say I saw someone else say it first, which like Trump has subjected the United States of America in theory, right? Because a lot of this I've said before, I don't think it's going to happen. I think now he's trapped in this like issue because he received pushback. Like the ideal for Trump was that he did all of this. He frightened everyone with this, and every country just like took it on the chin and allowed him to play emperor for a little bit, and then he would have just like rescinded the vast majority of them after he was tired of playing emperor and tired of this issue. When they started to retaliate, his ego started to mean that he had to retaliate and he had to get into it, which doesn't excuse him. It doesn't that's the kind of thing that like bullies and abusers like fall back on to excuse their behavior was like, if you didn't fight back, I simply would have stopped after I got bored. Other countries can't be seen doing that. They have their own economic pressures. Other countries' politicians have their own political pressures. You know, it's a whole thing. He is the antagonist here, and the only way this could have ended sooner would have been if every other country, every other person rolled over. That didn't happen, so now we're stuck in this like zombie issue that he's going to pretend like wasn't just like a shallow way to boost his ego, like it had some sort of real goal. Yeah, yeah, but oh, do I see something? Speaking of tariffs, do I see something on? Do I see another CNN interview with Trump voters? You guys want a little bit of that? You guys want a little bit of CNN interview with Trump voters? I guess I should read the chat too. Actually, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. Um, Let me see if I can find something to engage you all while I'm in the bathroom. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Uh, ah, there we go. That's sweet. And I am back. I am back. I hope you enjoyed a little lo-fi to distract you while I was in the bathroom. Oh, it's just my thing. Lo-fi beats to be oppressed to. Exactly. Let's go. What is going on in the chat? The old hogwatch. Yeah, I like it. It's lowbrow. It's lowbrow. I will admit, hogwatch is lowbrow, and I don't mind calling it hogwatch. I don't need to pretend like I don't have. I've never seen Hassan's clips. I know what he calls it, and it's a great name. So I don't feel the need to like not use it just to be just to reinvent the wheel. Uh, but this one actually seems like it includes actual pigs, which I think adds a little something special. I love pigs. Pigs are great creatures. And cows. Oh man. Oh, okay. This is gonna be a hot one. I can tell already. It's gonna be hot. Wait, it's called the Reg Hog. Okay, okay. She she also works at the Red Hog Saloon. What is going on? What is going on? Oh my gosh. Okay, okay. Okay, we're gonna back up. We're gonna back up a little bit. We're gonna back up. We're gonna have we gotta start from the beginning. This is no. Can we just tone down the symbolism for a little bit? Can we just turn the can we just turn the symbolism knob down from like on the nose to appropriate. Okay, okay. I definitely washed my hands.
I wanted Chip. You wanted Chip. There was no way in hell I wanted her right there. But now I don't know. What would have been better?
Okay.
What were you expecting? I was expecting the lower cost of a lot of just
I will emphasize before we watch stuff like this, I do not think that the average Trump voter is represented by people. I struggle, right? I think that this is a closer approximation to the way the average Trump voter feels now, because like they're like if you go spend too much time on X, you see people who are like so slavishly devoted to Trump and Elon that they have totally supplanted their egos with those two, and part of that is hard to like fully, I don't know, fully parse out because a decent number of people on that website think that by pretending to do that, they'll also be financially rewarded by Elon. And so it is like, some people are really just they're just playing that role, which again doesn't inoculate you. Like pretending performative adherence to a conspiracy theory or performative adherence to allegiance to like a specific cult like leader or fringe group leader or whatever doesn't inoculate you from starting to actually believe those things through repetition. That happens to a lot of people. Like, so just because some people are just saying it to make money doesn't mean that they won't one day start to believe it. But I will say, I think this position is more akin to the way people actually who voted for Trump feel right now. Like there are a lot of people who had some kind of nebulous problem with Kamala Harris that was rooted, forgetting leftists who had like real legitimate problems with Kamala Harris. There are a lot of people who voted for Trump who had like 2028 to voting for the Democrat because things are expensive now. For the next person, this is more of that like middle ground Trump voter, like not the full blown MAGA, not the person entirely driven by like the cost of things. This is the person with like the nebulous political ideology that's largely just rooted in like I just don't kind of trust black people and blah 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 blah. So that's just where I frame this person.
your everyday living things and hoping that he would make things better for everybody in America because that's what we need. Groceries are already outrageous. And then we put the tariffs on across the seas or whatever, like China, all that. It just makes everything more expensive for everybody.
Jamie Basinger is the only person we met in eastern South Dakota who openly questioned her own political views.
She's the only person in this place at all.
Most people we talked to said it was risky to talk about politics here, even as the effects of Trump's tariffs loomed over the agricultural economy in an area that voted for him by about 70%. Generally, opinions were divided between trust Trump's plan and how can you still like this guy.
Wait, so Becky, let me ask one thing. Are you in a politically mixed marriage?
Yeah, did you see the Joe Biden sign? Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Becky Hofer was not afraid to talk. She's a Democrat, and her husband is a conservative non-voter. She's a freight broker. Basically, if a company needs to ship bricks, she'll find you a flatbed truck. If you need to ship meat, she'll get you a refrigerated truck.
Ooh, you need the truck tomorrow? Can you guys, fork a pallet jack into the back of the trailer for him to pallet jack him to the front?
This gives her a window into real-time shifts in the economy.
Everybody's nervous. People are making different decisions.
I will say that's the real silent majority, though, too. And that happens in fringe groups all the time, especially ones where people have used that fringe group as a mechanism for finding some kind of social cohesion that they would otherwise be lacking. So MAGA is like that too. A lot of disaffected lonely boomers are Q and MAGA because they have no friends now. that happens too. They start to feel like the peer pressure of not speaking out against the obviously bad thing because like, well, what if I lose my friends? What if I like so, we have to also include the fact that some people are performatively still supporting Trump because they're afraid of that pushback that they'll get from like vocally going out against him.
For different reasons, but some of it's hesitation, some of it's actual price changes. Everybody just wants some stability right now.
And those shifts can be complex. She says China's retaliatory tariffs on American pork and beef could lead to higher prices on fruit.
Right now it's produce season in California. We need to get out to California. What goes out to California? Meat. We haul pork. We haul beef. Where does it go? It goes to Asia. If it doesn't go, the price produce is going to go up even that much more because they're going to have to pay more for the trucks.
As we've talked about, you're in a really conservative area, very pro-Trump area. Like, do you feel frustrated in trying to talk to your neighbors about what's going on?
Yeah, it's the biggest thing that frustrates me is that I just feel like nobody cares right now until it affects them. And I don't understand how they don't see that. They're not dumb. These people aren't dumb. And they're not unkind people.
No, they're just selfish and self-involved, but they're taught to be that way. That's the important part to realize. Like they're taught to not make those connections. People are taught to draw the wrong conclusions from the things that they see, either by being denied the tools and the language to draw the right conclusions, or by being like outwardly told like what the right conclusions to draw are, and not having the former to act as a counter narrative. So like a lot of people are just enculturated in America to be selfish, individualistic, and self-involved, and to just not be able to see the connections between like the things that are happening to other people and themselves. And so it's too late. And that's what also makes like a lot of Americans like unsympathetic victims when you watch them on the news talking about the cost of like milk rising, because you go like, oh, like it had to happen to you before you understood like how bad it was. And when you're in the muck of that mentality, you're like, of course, that's totally reasonable. It's like it's actually not very reasonable, and it's an impediment. It's like an actual impediment to like learning. It's an impediment to being able to like engage with the reality that you live with and having to experience every single thing yourself. It's not like it's not a sign of a free thinker. It's a sign of like a dumb person.
And selfish people. And thoughtless people, so I don't understand.
They probably are, just not the people in their family.
Why they're okay with it.
Hofer introduced us to her neighbor Rod Olerud, who is feeding cattle and who, for now, is okay with it.
I just think we need to let the president do what he's doing, and we need to just see what's going to happen here and give him a little latitude so that, if it doesn't work, then we're going to have to try something different.
Okay. So you're willing to let the president try some stuff to see?
Yes, to see if this works. Let's give the president a chance, and we'll just have to go from there. Looks like a little boy.
Tommy Baruth thinks we already give it a chance. He's a retired soybean farmer who saw what happened in 2018 when Trump put tariffs on China.
The export market just went right down the tube because these countries could buy them from other places cheaper. Brazil and other countries were the ones that benefited from that.
I read that it stayed that way, that now China buys a lot more from Brazil.
Exactly. And a lot of times those markets don't come back.
Yeah.
Doug Bjerke runs a lawn mowing business. He says Trump's plan will work out in the long term, even if some crop prices fall.
Yeah, the price might come down, but when them people start starving, they're going to come back to the table.
You mean in the other countries?
Yeah, we're a gracious nation feeding the world. And we shouldn't have to without getting something
baby.
for it.
Ooh.
Rick Ekman says in the 3 days after the tariffs, cattle futures dropped below the point of break even for his farm.
Never had him do this before.
Yeah, he really likes you.
Did you vote for Trump?
No. No, I did not.
Why not?
Good for you.
You want me to be truthful? I think to get to where he's at today, he's stepped on people.
Yeah.
And he's got no morals, I don't think. I don't like the man.
Yeah.
I don't like him.
Why do you think
This guy is at least smart enough to have known people who have taken advantage of him, and to have identified that. A lot of people in America have been taken advantage of. People in America are taken advantage of every day by their government, every day by their politicians. And you have to teach them to not realize that. And oftentimes this happens with scams all the time, like, crypto, people getting those like honeypot scams or like pig butchering scams via WhatsApp. A lot of Americans imagine that they are scam proof. that they are like, that they are flim flam inoculated. And those people are the most vulnerable to being scammed by like hucksters like Donald Trump. This man has probably, been scammed once or twice and like can recognize the signs. Because the truth is, like, Trump has a long history of scamming people, has a long history of leaving dissatisfied business partners, dissatisfied, construction workers in New Jersey, to the point where some people, like in some places in the country, people wouldn't even work with him. And to look at that situation, look at that person and think that he wants to work with you is a failure of critical thinking, a failure of critical empathy to be able to actively identify which person in a dynamic you are more like outside of aspiration, right? And by that I mean, it's like people will look at Trump scamming the average worker and go like, I'm Trump in that scenario. That's like I want to be Trump, and he's telling me I can be like him, and so I'm him in that dynamic. I'm the one who's doing the scamming, and that's a big way in which people get drawn into being scammed, which is thinking that they're the person in power, that they're the one who's going to be scamming someone else, that you're the one who's going to be on the top of the pyramid scheme when the pyramid has already been like fully constructed and you're making up the bottom. And Trump is like that with his cult too, and if you've been through that before, I don't know anything about this guy, but he strikes me as a world weary farmer. But if you've been through that before once or twice, you can recognize it pretty simply. Especially if you are actively engaging with that. If you've been scammed once or twice and you just refuse to admit that you've been scammed, or that the fault relied, not the fault, but like the reason why you were scammed is because you were tricked into having more ego than you did intelligence, you're going to keep falling for it forever.
Any of your neighbors do support
I don't know. I guess I don't see anything good about him.
Do you affect the way you think about America?
It scares me.
Terry Nevillsick, a lifelong Republican and retired school superintendent, was very careful in how he talked about the political climate. He's concerned that Trump's push to dissolve the Department of Education will cut public school funds for needy kids.
It will.
Potentially at a time of economic turmoil.
If poverty is happening to adults, children are hurting. And where adults sometimes just have to work through it and make sure there's food on the table. During that time, we have children and adolescents who are forming who they're going to be. And I do think that the public school is a collecting point for people to be able to reach those kids and make sure that they're fed and have medical attention and have their basic needs met.
Again and again, our conversations in this Midwestern nice town came back to character and values.
When Sheila and I raised our children, we taught them to be honest, not try to cheat anybody, to respect. Trump doesn't do any of those things.
Do you find a lot of farmers around here agree with you, or are they fans of Trump?
This is a very...
I thought she said that she couldn't find anybody in this town to talk about Trump negatively, but it seems like she found a bunch of people to be like, yeah, Trump sucks. That last guy was just like, there's not a single redeeming quality about that guy. So, I mean, I don't know what that introduction was about. Maybe this is like a slightly different town, but there seem to be a lot of people here who are like, yeah, Trump sucks.
Republican state. I think it's too soon for them to say they're wrong.
Ellie, I love the conversations that you are able to bring to us and bring to light. Given everything that we just saw, do the Trump supporters that you spoke to, do they regret their vote?
I get that question so much, particularly from people in bluer states, and again they say no.
Right.
They really put a lot of faith in him. One man described him as courageous, and they said people have told me they're willing to take a serious financial hit to their...
People just say that, though. I'm not trying to dispute, like, what she's saying. She's reporting it. But you got to understand, people just say that. People just say those words when they don't mean them because they think it shows. They're smart enough to know that it shows, like, a certain level of conviction that they know people will, like, think is good. It's much harder to realize that admitting that you're wrong is not some sort of, like, I don't know... well, I mean, depending on what you're wrong about, it can be very shameful. But, like, what I mean is that people have already, this is a cult thing, people have supplanted their ego with Trump. People have decided that voting and being part of the Trump community makes them smarter and more moral than their opponents. To admit that they were wrong about that would be to admit something a lot more fundamental than that they were wrong about who to vote for president. It would mean a very, for some of those people, it would mean having to reflect on the fundamental values that they have and how they value themselves. And so people are incentivized socially to not do those things. And then a lot of people also subscribe to magical thinking, where if they just if they repeat mantras, if they repeat like certain phrases, then positive things will happen as a result of it. So saying that they believe in Trump and they support Trump, that's all well and good. But we'll see what they say once we'll see what some of them say once the prices of things actually rise to the point where it starts to, incredibly, it starts to impact their ability to live in a really appreciable way, as opposed to like the specter of those things starting to cause them anxiety. Because a lot of people are self-interested, like they were saying before. A lot of people are very self-interested, and it's not until they have it hit them that suddenly they can admit that they're wrong. And once they're able to at least admit that they're wrong to themselves, they just take one or two tracks. Most people disappear. Most people just disappear from from whatever community they were saying. They don't talk about it anymore. At least the broader community. You can't disappear from your wife usually as a result of that. But the people who are harping about it online will disappear slowly. You'll stop seeing the same Trump figures who are now struggling to make ends meet, because they'll realize their mistake and they won't want to cop to it. And then some people will actually speak out about it. And then obviously there's a certain subsection who will just double down, who will just continue to double down. You see that with crypto too. After their money gets stolen, after their money gets seized or whatever, they just go well, that's just the cost of doing business. That's just, that was a expensive lesson to learn. And you're like, did you learn a lesson though? Because you're still doing the exact same thing. But yeah, it's not surprising that you can still find people like this, because it's survivor's bias. There'll always be people who are like this. It's the percentage of people who are like this who voted for Trump,